You know what the difference is between a tambourine player and a terrorist? You can negotiate with a terrorist. Big difference. So we're just about, I think we've got a full room here. I'm going to go ahead and launch onto the program. And I do apologize, I went kind of nuts on the handouts this time. Really, the first 2 pages are of the outline is all you really need for right now. And then I'll be showing those charts on the screen, so we don't necessarily need those printed out. And any references to my own jam experiences or humorous or not humorous jams I've had are all going to be included, of course, in my book, Banjos in Babylon. Shameless self-plug here, which is available on the JamAlong website. It's a story of bluegrass jamming. Anyone here have the book, the Banjos in Babylon book? Raise your hand. Cool. We've got people who can read. I love this. Very uncommon in the banjo playing demographic. Welcome. I'm so glad y'all made it. These kind of things are embarrassing if I'm only here and no one shows up. So it's awesome when people make time for these. This subject is quite in-depth, and I kind of had a hard time writing this outline. There's just so much to talk about with jam sessions, and I'm very thrilled to say I have a couple of special guests who are running jam sessions on their own, and we're going to call upon you at some point to say a few words. You can always plead the fifth, but the fifth. But hopefully you'll speak to your experiences in corralling your jam monkeys. So I consider it a game. It's a musical game. It's been called hot potato. We pass it around. Sometimes you drop the potato. Sometimes you get burnt. But you keep passing the lead around or the vocals around. So let's talk about under item 1. I'd like to get a bird's eye view before we begin about what I consider the basic parameters of the jamming game. And whether or not you're already leading jams, once again, my disclaimer is this is just my personal approach. Take what you like. If you don't like it, send it right back. But hopefully you'll find a couple tools in today's class that you can use when you run your jams. If you haven't run a jam yet, hopefully this will inspire you to try this wonderful hobby. It's really, really quite fun when it goes well, and when it goes terribly, it's also amusing to the person leading the jam. So, the parameters. The first main parameters are ability level and style. You probably heard before jams advertised as a slow jam. Beginner jam. Everyone plays super duper slow. That way there's no trauma occurring, and we can all learn our instruments together, essentially. Then you can advertise your jam as a intermediate to advanced jam for faster tunes. As most of you know, there's 3 tempos in music: slow, medium, and bluegrass. So the idea is you want to be clear about what kind of ability levels you're going to have in your group. If you have a complete beginner who just knows a G chord, hanging out with people who are playing light speed bluegrass, it's going to be uncomfortable for certain individuals. So then we have style. So the idea of jam style is, and we're going to talk about this a bit down under in the graphic, the JamAlong tree, and I talk about the different styles of music that are common for jam sessions. But for example, if you go to an Irish pub jam and everyone's playing the same melody all the time, every time, and you hear this, and you go away and have a drink and come back 40 minutes later and you hear this. Everyone's playing the same song all the time, most of the time. You're not going to do this. That would be like putting sauerkraut on your banana split. Some styles of music just don't mix, okay? And so, for example, I couldn't cover all the styles in this jam. I'm just going to, in this class, I'm talking about the styles that people commonly sit around and play music together. Bluegrass, folk, country, Celtic, a little bit of gypsy swing and jazz. That's about it. You'll notice I didn't cover much on hip-hop today. Sorry, Devin. But that's the question. Do you know why music is like candy? Because it's better without the wrapper. Now, let's talk a little bit about the instruments that come to a jam. For example, I tend to allow almost all instruments in my jam, with the exception of the shaker egg and the didgeridoo. I do have a story about the didgeridoo in my Banjos in Babylon book. I believe it's the first chapter, entitled Didgeridoo. I should make a t-shirt that says that. But when you're creating your email or your phone list for your jam session, if you don't specify the the ability level that you're targeting, and the kind of music that you're going to be playing, your odds of having train wrecks are far greater. So that's right out the gate. We want to have those two parameters of the game. Now, instruments, that's a third category. I didn't really talk too much about that. Like I said, as long as people have stuff that has all the strings on and can somewhat operate them, then you're probably good. Just remember, do not include saxophones if you also have violins in your session. You know why? Because then you'll have too much sax and violins in your music. That's a fact. Now, item 2. Some people like that stuff. Item 2, what it takes to be a jam leader. First of all, after I wrote this outline, I'm like, you know what? I should probably speak just a second to the term jam leader. It's not autocratic. It's not like you're a dictator of the music session. It just means someone, and I'm sure people in this class know exactly what I'm talking about, had to make up a song list, had to probably print out some chord charts, had to write what keys were after the titles, maybe had to even assign certain folks to sing certain songs. This is the organizing that has to take place to make the jam effective. If you want to call yourself head mucky muck, if you want to call yourself the leader, whatever, but the point is someone sort of, it has to drive that train if it's going to be an effective session. So let's talk about some of what I consider the critical skills are to being a jam leader, and that's under item 2 in your syllabus. First of all, organizing skills. This is making the jam happen. We're going to circle back to that under item 9 a little bit here. Then I like to say knowing at least half a dozen songs. You can do a jam with 3 songs, but you're going to have to make those songs go on for quite some time. If it's a Grateful Dead cover jam, I'm sure that's no problem. Which reminds me, how many Deadheads does it take to change a light bulb? Well, it takes all of them, but first they have to follow the old light bulb around for 40 years until it burns out. Then they can change it. My apologies for the Deadheads in the class. Now let's talk about understanding jam conducting. You actually are conducting. You might not have a wand and a black suit and be standing in front of a symphony, but when you're running a jam, you're conducting the flow of the song. And that's the fun and the terror of doing this job. Because sometimes it's like you're literally on a runaway train, and I'm sure some of you that run jams know what this feeling is. When the bass player is on time and the mandolin person's playing twice as fast and the ukulele person is still tuning. Okay? Or the guitar player is waking up from their nap. Sometimes it's really hard to get them all in the same lane. So that's why we have a science of jam conducting, and I call this jam anatomy. That's one of your charts in the syllabus. We'll circle back to that when I get to item 3. This is sort of an outline of the skills that it takes to effectively lead jams. So we're talking about organizing. This is all under 2. Knowing at least half a dozen songs. Understanding conducting. And then a very important part, D under 2, is sharing the leadership. If I'm conducting a jam, I don't like to sing all the songs. I like other people to sing songs. So I will offer that option up to people. However, a lot of people in your jams that want to sing a song still don't feel confident to conduct the lead flow and make sure it starts and ends correctly. So it is possible, and this is something a lot of jam leaders haven't thought about, it is possible to have other people take turns singing while you still conduct it. And that actually makes it easier on the participants. Now, finally, having the necessary skills in preparation. Item 3. This is a big issue of controversy. I've had jams in public parks. Beautiful day, sunny, beautiful day, grass, kids playing with hula hoops, and all of a sudden, next to me is the guy who shows up with his nylon string guitar, only 2 strings on it, his eyes are aiming in opposite directions, and he's banging away out of tune right next to me. The problem with the public or in a park jam is you have to institute some kind of policing because there's no barrier between wander-ups, people just showing up with the tambourine, okay? The soccer mom with the boxed wine and the shaker egg. That's basically the musical equivalent of a WMD. And I've seen entire jams go down in flames with one shaker egg. I have a very terrifying story about the shaker egg in my book too. It involves how not to use them. And now, so we're talking about when you organize it. I know my friend Charlie here, who will have speak in a little bit here, does, I believe, a public jam. I'm sure it's in a beautiful spot. And I'm sure every now and then you get some participants that are a wee bit too enthusiastic, that you just met, and you have to find out how to negotiate your way out of this, okay? But now with the private jam in the backyard or in the front room, that's not an issue. You kind of have autocratic control now, and you pretty much can select who you invite, or even more importantly, who you don't invite back, hopefully with a nicely worded email. I do have people that come to me and they have that trauma of going to a jam and then never getting an email to invite them back. Generally, it's because they didn't learn how to play the chords. And we'll talk about that in the 5 levels section. Necessary skills and prep. Item B is style and designation. We mentioned that. We'll circle back to that. Now, C under 3, the song list. And I know some of you are really good at creating these. It makes it so much easier for everyone if they all have a pre-emailed, printed out list of songs. And after the titles, for the love of Pete, put the keys. Because that way you don't have everyone pestering you, what key is it in, what key is it in, what key is it in. And so that's what I call the ritual of water and whiskey. Water we play in, whiskey we in. So just remember, water and whiskey is a survival move for any song list. Charlie, you take that literally probably. I'm talking about the metaphor here. Now, it's early for me. It's still 10 a.m. I'm coming on to my coffee here. Bear with me. So now we're talking about chord charts. Not so necessary in a lot of bluegrass because they just have both chords, sometimes 3 chords. But you get into stuff like more stylistically versatile circles, maybe House of the Rising Sun, maybe 12-bar blues. It's not a bad idea to have chord charts. Now, I did supply a booklet a lot in the email that I use for my jams. You can pick and choose from those songs, and you'll notice, in fact, let's look at that real quick while we're talking about chord charts, because if sometimes you'll need to dash these out on paper, and it's not a bad idea to have the format standardized. So let me jump over here and do a screen share. So this is the JamAlong chord book that I use with 50 common songs, and what's important is I keep track of, in the table of contents, CH is chords, L is lead. So you can actually have your participants keep track of what songs they know by heart to strum along, and then what songs they have a lead part to. So if it keeps coming around to them and they just don't have a part they can play for the lead, that way they can check the ones they want to learn at their lessons later. Okay? But the general format for chord charts is just to have 4 measures, and they each equal 2 pick strums, unless it's 3/4, then it's pick strum strum, and just put the chord in at the top. We don't have to have the numbers of beats. We don't have to have the style of strumming. Everyone interprets that on their own. Okay? So the idea is if you have chord charts for the more challenging songs, it often can make this whole scene run a lot more smoothly. This is under necessary skills and prep in item 3. Now we get to the juicy stuff. Jam conducting. And I've thought long and hard about what to call this, and it really is conducting. I've seen some wild styles of jam conducting, including people screaming at each other. We're talking full-on arguments during the song. Jam conducting is a hot topic, and every musician's going to have their own theory on it. I broke mine down into a theory that we're going to get into. I have to tip my hat to one of the most virtuosic jam conductors I've ever met. He's in my book, Banjos in Babylon, under the chapter Obey Rob. His name was Tractor Rob, and he had a banner at his camp at the music festival that said Obey Rob, meaning obey him if you came into his jam. That was the first rule he laid out. But the problem was he would play his fiddle. He was a fiddler, and he loved the whiskey. And as he would consume bourbon while playing the fiddle, I still haven't figured out how he did that, he would lean against a tree and start to slide down the tree. And long story short, the whole story is in the book, he would end up conducting the jam lying on his back playing the fiddle, but doing it effortlessly and flawlessly, and every song started and landed perfectly. So you can develop your own unique style of this. It doesn't have to be by the book necessarily. So jam conducting, we'll get right back to that with the jam anatomy chart we're about to get into. Let's talk about flagging the endings. The typical way in most bluegrass is you've all seen the leg lift. You're standing around picking. You don't have any extra arms to wave or frantically gesture, so people tend to lift one foot up for a bit and then put it back down while they're playing. That's the universal jam sign language for the song is about to end. Now, please note, if you're standing and playing, only lift 1 foot at a time. Very important. Now, let's move on to item 4, a place for everyone. This is the first time I'm going to pull up the chart of the 5 levels. Some of you who have been my students for a while are familiar with this system. And basically, this is a way for me to include everyone in the jam session, even people with 0 musical talent, which is a great theory when you think about it, because we surprise ourselves sometimes with our lack of talent. So any jam session that's going on in any style is going to have these 5 levels. Guess what? The first level, you don't even have to play. You can sit there and enjoy it. It's called audience. I like audience at my jams. It makes it funner for me. Plus, you get applause at the end. Level 2 is rhythm. Guess what? If you have friends sitting around tapping on the offbeat, then basically you're going to have level 1 rhythm. Level 2 is the root. That's where bass players live. They play the root of the chord. The secret here is you can even do that while you play another instrument. If I'm playing a banjo or a musical instrument and it's in key of G, I can play a G note. And that's going to sound good with the groove as long as you're not too loud. Then we have level 3, which is strumming the chords. That's what most people assume is a jam session. Then we have level 4, which is the melody. That's usually sung by the vocalist, sometimes picked by an instrument. And then finally 5 is the lead part where we pass it around and take the leads. All you really need in a basic jam is levels 3 and 4. Basically, if you have people playing chords and someone singing a melody, that's your ground level jam session. So levels 3 and 4 are kind of like the critical levels to have. But if you understand as a jam leader that people who are just showing up and they're brand new and they're beginning and we want to encourage them, then there's no reason not to assign them to level 0 and say, hey, sit there and drink your coffee and have a good time. All you got to do is applaud at the end. It's that simple. Or, for example, they can play rhythm, okay? Clapping your hand is an instrument. That's level 1 rhythm. So keep that on your fridge. That's a good system for assigning people of various skill abilities different places in your circle. All right? So let's talk about the usage of the levels. In the chart, it says USE is the acronym, which stands for understanding, shifting and sharing, and then exploring the levels. So let me speak just a bit to that. Let's talk about this acronym. First of all, understanding them. Knowing which ones are critical, which are 3 and 4. Knowing which ones are optional, which is 5. People don't have to take turns playing the lead, but it's fun. And then knowing which ones are beginner level with 0 barrier to entry. That's 0 and 1. Okay? Shifting and sharing. Shifting levels is a great way to teach your jam participants to survive if they have no clue what they're doing or they forget what they're doing during the song. Let's say you have Joe Bob playing along on the chords. You notice Joe Bob is missing half the chords. In fact, he's playing another song probably. You politely suggest on the next song that Joe Bob shifts down to 1, mutes his strings or her strings, and makes a rhythmic noise. You can shift beginners down to play rhythm or just the root. If you have people who are strumming the chords, but you know they know how to improvise and they want to play a lead, you shift them up to level 5 when it's their turn and give them an opportunity to take a lead, to take the solo spot. So these aren't static levels. They're shiftable and you can jump around as you conduct the jam. Now, sharing the levels. Sometimes people will play chords in such a fashion that it has the melody. That's called chord melody. You can combine any of these levels and get new ideas for your creative playing when it comes your turn. Let's say we're doing, coming around the mountain, something silly and easy. I'm going to play the chords. G, and then it goes to D, but I want this melody. I'm going to try to combine them. Now I'm playing chord melody. I've combined levels. So you can actually use this chart also to get ideas for your own improvisations when you're doing your turn at the jam. So let's now move over to the bottom thing on the first page, which is using the 5 levels as a jam leader. In fact, let's go to page 2. I'm moving right along here. This is fun. We're going to have a good discussion as soon as I'm done browbeating you all. So on page 2, we have assigning participants per skill level. I know all of you do this already instinctively, but it's not a bad idea to be a little more scientific about it and think about it in this way. If you have some beginners in the session and that are struggling, once again, we politely suggest that they move down to all the way to level 0 and just hang out and have a glass of wine, or move up to clapping, which is level 1. Perhaps move up to just playing the roots of the chord, level 2. So you can assign people. In the converse, you can move people up if you know they can play leads. So you always want to be actively monitoring people's ability. So I call it lifeguarding, so no one gets mauled. We don't want to traumatize people. We want people coming back, and we want people learning how to play their instruments through the art of the jam session. Item 2 on page 2 is making sure critical levels 3 and 4 are present. I briefly talked about that. Most jam sessions consist of people strumming chords and somebody singing or playing a melody. That's like the must-have. So if you have that, you've got the jam. Okay, now let's have some fun. Let's talk about jam anatomy. Don't worry, this is PG-13. So, the intro. Generally, people count it off. 1, 2, 3, 4. Some people do what's called in bluegrass potatoes. That's sort of a verbal imitation of the sound of a fiddler playing the shuffle. 1E and a 2E, or a banjo player going. That's like a 4-beat lick or pattern that basically counts with your instrument. So that's a more sophisticated way to start the song, as opposed to starting it off like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Which works. Don't get me wrong. Try this. And then everybody's in right there. The instrument can count. That's what we call potatoes in bluegrass terminology, or bluegrass bonics. Then we have the intro riff. This is where each instrument has a specific lick that it uses to kick off a song. I'm holding a banjo right now just because I didn't feel like running around and grabbing 6 instruments during this class. But trust me, each instrument has classic licks they use. Banjo players. You hear that all the time. That's how we'll start out the song. Then we're in. So it's like 2 beats of a little lick, and then everybody's in. Fiddle players will do a shuffle. Ring, ding, a ring, ding, a ring, ding, a ring, ding, and then they're in, okay? My old buddy Sid Walker, who was an amazing fiddle player, played in Hank the Three's band. Remind me to tell you that story sometime. That's not PG-13, so I won't be sharing it on this class. But he had a classic kickoff he would always do. I'll try to imitate it on the banjo. It was like, diddle-da-da, and everyone's in. He called it the son of a bitch, I'm tired. That was his phrasing of the fiddle intro. You can use that for your own classes as well. Tame it down if you need. So the idea of the intro riff is every instrument has its way to launch the song. Finally, we have the refrain. Sometimes we'll use the chorus to start the song. I like that version. Let's say you're doing Will the Circle Be Unbroken. We would start the song like this. In the sky, low, in the sky. It's a really classy way to start the song. You'll do basically the ending of the chorus and then count into the song. You hear that a lot in gospel music, or a lot of like country gospel music. So that's the science of the intro. Okay, some of you might not have noticed. There's more ways to skin a cat than just counting it off. Now we have the song itself. This circle means once you're into the song and you're up and flying with everybody, which is a great feeling, you're going around and around in most styles of music between leads and back to the verse, leads and verse. And this is where you conduct that flow. There's only 3 ways when you think about it to have the lead parts go around. Either it's circular, which is standard. Everyone understands it's just going to go in a circle. I tend to go the same direction as the toilet bowl water goes when you flush, but that depends on what side of the equator you're on. And then there's the call out, which means you just yell at people. If it's a rough jam and people are having a tough time, I do call outs. I literally just go, pick it, Bob. Walk the dog, Sally. take it for a ride. I mean, you can have all kinds of colorful language to call out the leads, but it's part of the art of folk jamming is to conduct verbally that way. And then we have the prearranged. That's often found in more advanced jams, where they'll be like, okay, Bob, you're going to take it, and then Sally and Jill are going to play a split harmony, and so you plan it ahead of the song. And that's where you sort of verge on almost being like a band, not so much a jam, okay? Now, after that, when we go round and round and round, you can choose different kinds of leads. You can have everybody play at once, like in Celtic music. You can have sectional leads, meaning all the fiddles or all the mandolins. That's for big circles. And then finally, there's just one person at a time, usually for smaller sessions, okay? You can also mess with arrangements, a cappella harmonies, vocal harmonies, different textures by people dropping out or entering in. A lot of fun can be had prearranging this. But anyway, suffice it to say it goes in the circle, the continuum, round and round, and then you have the ending cue, like I said, the leg lift, or repeat the chorus, or just call out, we're about to land it, boys! Frantically yelling will get you there too. Then we have the ending. You can just end on the last chord, that's fine. But then we have what's called, I call the BG ending or the bluegrass ending, a very common rhythm where you've all heard it before. It's like a rest, beat, triplet, last chord. Let me demonstrate. You'll hear this all the time in like traditional bluegrass jams. So for example, I'll do circle. In the sky, Lord, in the sky. It's bump, 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 triplet, out. You'll hear so many bluegrass bands do that if you listen in. That's the rhythm. I'll do it a bit slower. In the sky, Lord, in the sky. And that way, no matter how gory the song was, you can redeem yourself by everyone sort of lands with some dignity. It's a great theory. Okay, now we talked about jam anatomy. That's all here under item 5, page 2. Launching, cueing the leads, different types of leads, advanced lead options. You can split breaks, you can do harmonies. I have a class called Advanced Jamming on our YouTube channel too if you want to follow down that rabbit hole a bit more. This is more just an overview, okay? Let's talk about jam etiquette. And this is something I'm going to circle back and have a couple of you all speak to, you jam leaders in the class in a little bit here. Jam etiquette generally, as long as people are having a good time and the song sounds relatively like the song it started out as, and you're somewhat ending at the same time, and most of you are in the same key, God bless you, carry on. But there is a system I like to call, for lack of a better term, the 10 Jamandments, and I'm going to go over those real quick with you because there might be some handy tricks you can pick up for that. Number 1, you shall always tune first and tune away from others. Nobody likes to hear a banjo right next to your ear twanging away tuning. Tuning loudly in the circle is kind of a universal no-no. I just pick up and then go to the other side of the room or step outside, have a beer break and tune my banjo. Number 2, always approach a jam, and this refers to a public jam, what I call the 3 Ps, politeness, patience, and preparedness. In other words, polite is, hey man, can I sit in? Patience is, wait your turn. Don't just launch onto your upper neck lead. Wait till it comes around to you. And preparedness is maybe learning a couple of the songs prior to going to the jam. The 3 Ps are like your survival for public jams when you're approaching them. You shall recognize and follow the jam leader. That's a bit controversial. Some people think I'm being autocratic here, but that's my system. Then 4, if you are the jam leader, you shall always give everyone a chance to lead. That's an interesting one. If someone else in the jam is good at running a circle, let them call some songs. Let them conduct it. For the love of Pete, let them sing. 5, you shall know your level and play accordingly. If you just know the chords, probably best you play the chords. When you learn a lead, play the lead. But then we have 6, you shall know the jam lead tree and play accordingly. We're about to get there. And then 7, you shall play backup first and lead only when it's your turn. I'm seeing some smirks here. All of you who lead jams know that the person who plays their lead the whole time is kind of an issue. And backup is something that happens 80% of the time. Those of you who take lessons with me hear me preaching about this all the time. And then 8, you shall not sing unless you know the words. That's a funny one. It happens. People who have no clue what the lyrics are singing away at the top of their lungs. And then 9, you shall be respectful of civilians. That means if you are in the backyard and it is approaching 1 in the morning, maybe move it indoors. Okay? I have a classic example of what not to do in my book, Banjos in Babylon, available at JamAlong.org. And the chapter is called Beer and Loathing. In fact, it's 3 chapters. And that's everything you shouldn't do when you're leading or running a jam at a festival. Then we have 10. And this is the universal feeling. We're doing it for fun, friendship, and self-improvement. That's it. It's not a contest. It's not a concert. We're not getting paid. We're probably losing money. So our values here is it's a hobby. We're making new friends, and we're getting better on our instruments as we run or participate in the jam. Okay? So that was the etiquette part, the 10 Commandments. Let's talk a little bit about theory. I don't mean music theory like learning scales and chords. I mean, what kind of theory can help us to conduct the jams more smoothly? Well, we have the chord families chart in your syllabus. It's like, I think, the last graphic there. And I'm not going to pull that up because you all probably have copies of it who do lessons with me. But it's a good idea to know what chords go together in general, because that means if you're unfamiliar with the song that someone else calls, you have a fighting chance. If they call a song in D, you happen to know, according to your chord family, that D, G, and A are very likely to occur. And then the secondary chords, like the 3 or the 4, that would be B minor or E minor, are fairly likely to occur as well. So basically, you have a chance to sound like you know the song, even if you don't. Okay? Now let's talk about the Nashville number system. Notice on your chord families chart, there's little numbers there. Those numbers refer to the scale tones, the scale steps that those chords are built on. So in a G scale, if we count the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1 is G, obviously. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 steps up is a C. 5 steps up is the D. So if we don't refer to the letter names of the chords, if I'm calling a song in G and I go, it goes G, C, D, I also could say it goes 1, 4, 5. And the benefit of that is the people with the capos on won't get that weird look on their face and be completely confusticated. They'll be able to play along because you're referring to relationships, not keys themselves. So if you have a lot of capos in the jam, the number system is not a bad idea. Now, real quick, we have 4, 4 versus 3, 4. Then I like to say, how many chucks should a plucker chuck? Meaning, the phrase boom chuck has 1 chuck in 4, 4 time, and 3, 4, it has 2 chucks. That answers the timeless question, how many chucks should a plucker chuck? Say that 5 times fast. Now, real quick, we're going to go into the basics of improvisation, the things we come up with. It's often fun to allow people the chance to terrify themselves and take a solo when it's their turn where they improvise and make it up on the spot. It's kind of controversial, but I like to offer people that opportunity. Worst case, they get traumatized, pawn their banjo, and now they are a CPA. But you can change their odds by suggesting chord picking. Just follow the chords and pick the notes out of the chord. Banjo players call that rolls, but it works for mandolin, guitar, and fiddle, and ukulele too. Stop strumming, play the same chords, and pick out single strings. That counts as a lead. Then we have the bluegrass scale. I can't get into that too much because I want to make sure I don't run out of time here, but that's in my How to Improvise workshop on YouTube. And basically, it's a major pentatonic scale with added blue tones of flat 3 and flat 7. Okay? That's going to be on YouTube later if you didn't write it down. If you take lessons with me, you probably know what that is. I have the Art of Noodling. That's another class where I talk about how to just keep notes coming out of your instrument. Let's talk just a bit about capers. If you have people using capos, you have to remember that that can kill a jam, because if the banjo player is playing with the capo 2 and thinking that they're in G, making G and C chord shapes, but the song's actually in A, and you're calling it in A, the people without the capo have to play A chords, but the banjo player is going to be playing G chords. So as soon as capos come out, you have a little bit of risk factor. Okay? That's where the Nashville number system is so effective. Let's talk about jam lifeguarding. Almost done here. Then we're going to have some speakers. I'm looking forward to that so I can stop making words for a minute. I had to cram a lot in here. This was a lot to cover. So, lifeguarding. if you see someone out there floundering, throw them a frickin' life ring, man. Go over there, play next to them, get them back in time. You're the shepherd of the jam, okay? If someone's playing way out of tune and the people next to them are starting to scoot away, they're like dissolving into their own black hole of lack of time, then you go over there and you try to get them back on the path. Jam lifeguarding is important when you have larger circles, especially public jams. Avoiding jam busters. That's the term for songs that probably shouldn't be featured in the jam, okay? If Rainbow Bob has this song they wrote about saving trees and hugging dolphins, and it's in the key of E flat, and it has 13 chords, I'm sure it's a beautiful expression of Rainbow Bob's soul. But it doesn't necessarily help your jam trying to explain all 13 chords to everyone there. It's a jam buster. So avoid songs that aren't on the list or that have too many chords unless you want a challenge. Good luck conducting that. Then we have the train wreck. It's the universal bluegrass phrase for when the jam goes off the road, over the mailboxes, into the ditch, bursts into flames with no survivors. Sometimes the songs do that. One solution. Humor. Everybody laugh. Go, man, that was terrible. God, that was terrible. I had a recent show, and my band is so rusty. We tried to play Hotel California. It was awful. I forgot all the lyrics. We were bumping heads on the solos. It was so bad I started laughing on the mic, like laughing on stage. And it sort of saved it because people thought it was a comedy show all of a sudden. So humor is how you deal with the train wrecks. And then, of course, trying to figure out how it happened. Now, finally, we have advertising and organizing. And this is where I'm going to bring Charlie in to help me discuss this, because he's done a really good job with promoting a jam. So we're going to now make this the open part of the class. And if you're there, Charlie, go ahead and unmute yourself. That's something I'm sure you don't hear a lot.
Yeah, so it started out with me just, learning rolls on the beach. And caveat, I suck. So I was trying to transition from 2 to 3, right, on your hierarchy. And people have a good time. And so I used Facebook. So once I had pals who were like friends I'd never had before, who brought out their guitars. Hey, you jam here? Well, I guess so. I didn't know what a jam was. I kind of still don't, but that hasn't stopped me yet. And then I just started a Facebook page. Everybody, and I highlighted the fact that you don't have to be good to be here. That just like you said, Braden, that this is a place if you want to learn, if you forgot and want to relearn, if you're good and want to help, or if you're really good and are patient, come on down.
I like that.
You want to make it, at least for my jam, which you're familiar with a little bit, Braden, like it's instrument agnostic. And, some guy brought a tuba once, which was interesting.
Wow, but, you're brave.
Yeah. So we're called Broadneck Bluegrass.
Tuba or not tuba, yes.
Bluegrass, right?
Sorry.
Right. And so the thing is that for us, for the advertisement portion, and I'll shut up in a sec, it's important to be a community, like open to the community. And
I like that.
It's important to assuage people's fears that they suck.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Charlie. Hey, Lance, would you mind speaking a couple words to jam leading?
Okay, sure. Although I have to say that the jam sessions that we have are quite different. It was a public guitar jam, not a bluegrass jam, just a pure guitar jam.
I love it.
Several years ago that was held at the town where I live, the senior center. So I started going and anyway, COVID kind of shut it down. And so after a few months, I put it out to those who had attended, come on over to my house and we'll jam in my basement. I've got a big room there we could do. So that's what we started doing. But again, the jam session, we don't play a lot of the bluegrass tunes. Lynn, you can attest to that. How are you, Lynn? We live close to each other. So Lynn came over and added
awesome.
the wonderful banjo sound to our jam. And so we did try a few of those, and they were train wrecks for the most part, not because of Lynn, but because the rest of us couldn't play them. But we've had a lot of fun. And so I've started getting my banjo out now along with the guitars. And playing half the time banjo and the other half the time guitar.
That's
But
awesome.
we do things like Creedence Clearwater and Bob Dylan and Beatles, and so it's really not bluegrass jam, but we have a lot of fun. Charlie had asked me also via chat here about what program I use, so I'll share that with everyone. I use a program called OnSong, and it works on iPads. And so we've gone from these thick 3-ring binders to now we all just have our little iPad, and it's got 1,800 songs in it,
Awesome.
and it's got the lyrics and the chords above the lyrics. So we don't just have chord charts; we have essentially lyric sheets, or what I call lead sheets.
Yeah.
So that way we can sing, we can add harmonies, and we're doing songs that aren't just 3 chords necessarily.
That's great. But that speaks also to the idea of having some form of song lists. And I know, Charlie, I've seen your list on the Facebook group, and it's great. I believe you got the title and the key, and I think you're also suggesting who's singing it as well, right? If all we took away from this group is that you got to have a list of songs, it helps to have lyrics and chords, and it also helps to have the key very obvious, and it also helps to assign different people singing it if you're having that happen. Let me speak just a bit to different styles, because I talk a lot about bluegrass, but those of you who work with me personally one-on-one know I love blues and jazz and everything not grass. So each style actually has its own jammability level, you might say. So that's why I created the Jamly tree. And this goes from easier to more difficult. So let me do a really quick rundown of this. So the beginner's slow jam is the universal entry point for most people. Then we have the universal sing-along, where it's a lot of like standards and Crosby, Stills, and Nash and whatever. That's sort of what I think some of what you're doing is, Lance. And then we have the classics jam, more rock and roll. I think, Lance, you do a bit of that too. Like the songs you just mentioned are classics. So I put those at the lower part of the tree because they don't feature a lot of lead playing a lot. It's more of the focus on singing and strumming along, which is great. That's levels 3 and 4 in my 5 levels theory. Then we have the old-timey jam. That's kind of like dirty bluegrass. It's like bluegrass. Some people are going to give me grief for this when this goes on YouTube, but it's a little more, not sloppy, but expressive. And they play the melodies all together, kind of like Celtic, okay? Then we have in the middle of the tree, the traditional bluegrass jam and the traditional Irish jam. The skill level has to bump up because it's fast and we trade the leads around. And in the Celtic Irish jams, you need to know the melodies or you get kicked out. Like, you have to know actual melodies. Then we have the spontaneous jam. That's where no one really knows what's going on, and they're following someone who sort of makes up chords as they go along. And that often happens like on the beach in Santa Cruz at 2 a.m. Then we have the songwriter spotlight. This means some original songwriters sharing their songs and expecting people to psychically know what chords they're going to use. So that's a really difficult one. Having singer-songwhiners, as they call them, invade a jam can be very dangerous. The highest, most difficult levels, and this isn't a quality level, this is difficulty jam levels, is jazz, of course, with tons of chords. The progressive jam, it's bluegrass people who have been infected with jazz. The showboat jam is really a band with a rock star doing it. And then the faux jam is a performance that you stumbled into in someone's backyard and they're actually performing and they don't want you to jam. So that obviously is the most difficult of them all. So the reason I wanted to go over that Jamly tree real quick is because I want to make it clear at the closing of this class that pretty much all styles of music can be shared in a group, okay? Some can't. You don't hear a lot of chamber musicians jamming. They play together, reading the scores when they're playing, beautiful music, but it's composed, you know what I mean? And speaking of composers, there's a story that everyone told Beethoven that he couldn't be a composer because he was deaf, but he didn't listen. Sorry about that. So, in closing, basically, as long as you have the organization and the good attitude and the general love of humanity, I know that's hard sometimes, but having these circles doesn't mean you have to be really good on your instrument. As long as you have an approach, a song list, the keys, a certain group of people, you've decided what style it is, what ability level it is, whether it's open or private, and you have these parameters blocked out, The reason I want to teach you all this is you won't have bad experiences. You might have some rough experiences. I'm sure, Charlie, you've had some rough experiences, but you pick up, dust off, and the next jam gets better because you start developing your repertoire, developing your song list, developing your friendships. And then just, as long as you make sure it doesn't end up a band eventually, then you have to have meetings and, end up in rehab. But as long as you keep it on a light, playful level, I think that's the whole secret here. So once again, I want to say, if you want some amusement about jamming, get my book, Banjos in Babylon. It's available at the JamAlong.org website on the store page. And I shamelessly talk about all my terrible jamming experiences in that book. So you'll feel better about your own. And also, those of you who have private lessons with me coming up, remind me to touch on this stuff. Because now that we're leaving the zombie apocalypse finally, and we can start thinking about this fall hosting jams, just try it. Worst case, you don't do it again. You go, wow, that was traumatic. I'm never going to do that again. But why not try it? You might like it. It might take off. Okay? So thank you so much for being part of today's class. So finally, item 10, we have the big picture, which is what Charlie just touched on. Ultimately, we're building community and we're making friendships with music as the medium to do that. And that's the main point here. And like Charlie said, this is the time to do it. Let's knit back together. Let's make stuff happen. Let's have fun doing it and get better on our instruments as well. It's a win-win-win. Okay? Thank you all so much for coming out tonight, this afternoon, whatever time it is in your zone. I know some of you are across the globe. But I look forward so much to seeing you all at your sessions whenever I see you. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Stay in touch with me. Send me emails if you have questions. I always love hearing from you all, okay? Thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much. Have a great and jam-filled weekend. Talk to you all soon.